Hello and welcome to the World University Summit. This is the third day, the 20th session, and the topic is lessons from the pandemic, digital transformation, virtual sustainability, and digital divide. Joining me today, Ms. Rupal Nayar, Director, India University Partnerships, Coursera, United States of America. Phalgun Kompalli, co-founder, upGrad, India. Professor Eduardo Peñalver, President, Seattle University, United States of America. Professor Mohamed Ibrahim bin Abdul Mutalib, Vice Chancellor, University Teknologi, Petronas, Malaysia, and Ashwin Fernandes, Regional Director, MENA and South Asia, QS, India. I mean, the kind of people that we have in the panel makes my job easy because they will take it through. I will be your timekeeper. The lessons from the pandemic, if there was one lesson, the first lesson that we talk about, and we've been talking about the last 1.5 years, is of course technology. And as a journalist by training, when I would speak to journalism students or to anyone else, I would say, imagine a world for the last 1.5 years where you were not connected through internet or through communication. I mean, that would be the dark ages. We would be literally living under a rock without technology. So technology and digital technology really helped us, or is helping us, go through the crisis in more ways than one. But that's not what we are really going to discuss today. The discussion is going to veer around the pandemic and digital learning, which has now widely become or has been accepted as a new standard in the education system. But students, however, from underprivileged backgrounds in the developing world particularly, have struggled to keep up with their classmates due to the digital divide. It has underlined the need for greater investment in universal digital learning by both public and private organizations. The challenges associated with underdeveloped and developing countries, digital divide, are considerable and need immediate action. While a person from lower income or more challenged demographic may have internet access even if they live in metropolitan cities, a wealthier person in a rural or more advantaged geographic zone may not. And we encounter this problem almost every day, even in class, even in a university like Jindal University. I teach a very small class size, but I know the challenges and I'm almost exposed to it. I learn every day the kind of challenges that students go through. Smart classrooms are required to help students achieve their educational goals by providing them with the requisite ICT resources. Despite the fact that many rural and low-income communities worldwide, as well as metropolitan centers, do not have dependable, inexpensive internet connection, these populations continue to be excluded from the advantages technology offers. So my key word really for this discussion, this panel discussion, is going to be disruption rather than digital transformation, because disruption was anyway the key word even before the pandemic came in. I have been with digital technology for a very, very long time because broadcast technology went digital, and that the real transformation happened then. That is at least in developing countries and in India, we've seen a fantastic boom that happened in the late 90s and through the 2000s. But what is today's transformation going to mean for the future? And however, to maximize the benefits of using technology to radically reform the education sector, governments and universities must first make a fundamental digital learning infrastructure is in place. Therefore, the discussion of this panel will focus on how to achieve the digital transformation of higher education while overcoming the digital divide and ensuring virtual sustainability. If I can start with Rupal, you also are a knowledge partner for this summit, and Coursera has become a familiar word across the world, I know, because a lot of people, including my colleagues and students, have actually opted for courses on Coursera rather than actually opt for internships as students have taken up. But the obvious question, is that going to be the future? Is digital learning the future? Because students or teachers like me are not exactly happy with this distance learning or the digital learning, but you seem to push for it. So since we've transitioned to the online format of teaching and learning across the last 1 year, there are key benefits, but these challenges, are you aware of these challenges and how are you approaching that?
Thanks, Kishalay. I think it's a pretty interesting question because, as you said, on the one side, you see so many more students coming and learning online, not just on Coursera, on upGrad, and many other platforms out there. Just in the last year at Coursera, we've gone from about 47 million learners pre-pandemic to 80 million learners. In India, we've gone from about 4 million to about 12 million. Faculty also want to learn online, but at the same time, I think that the challenges you talk about are pretty prevalent and important. And I think the core one at that is faculty development, is learner retention. When the pandemic struck, it was kind of a forced nature that faculty just had to get on Zoom and really teach live. But all of us know that that's not sustainable. It's not dynamic learning. It causes fatigue for teachers as well as students. So how do we really tackle that as a community is one big challenge. I think the other big challenge is all of us know that as per UNESCO, when the pandemic struck, about 1.6 billion students around the world couldn't really go to school. And so a lot of those students came online, like you said, and they began learning, but a lot of them also, as you said, probably couldn't really learn online. They maybe didn't have power, they didn't have infrastructure, they didn't have hardware. So that's a pretty critical question to ask as well. At Coursera, we've been taking kind of one step at a time. So as we look at data, the glimmer of hope that I'd love to highlight here is that while learners increased, at the beginning of the pandemic, we would have thought that women whose jobs were really being impacted during the pandemic as they took on the burden of the larger family care. On Coursera, we actually saw that worldwide, the share of women's course enrollments actually grew from about 38% pre-pandemic to 45%. In India specifically, it grew from 25% to 35%. So while there is the digital divide and there are some key questions to ask and answer for faculty and students, it is a bit of a glimmer of hope that for women who probably had other conflicting priorities, online learning is coming front and center and giving them the space and flexibility to learn as they're having to experience and face other challenges.
Okay, since you mentioned about women, I mean, there was a study, a series of such studies at EPW, one of the Indian journals, and what is so wrong with online teaching, where EPW, one of the articles, basically says that it has a particularly heinous effect for women, both female students and female family members. And given the gross, unequal burden of domestic work that women share at home, often the female students would have to take up additional domestic responsibilities during the lockdown in a different situation, and forced carving out of silence and privacy in the cramped domestic space may imply that the mother adjusts her own work time and domestic schedules silently. So while women, you said, could put in more hours, work hours, staying at home, but for the female members, particularly the girl students, and including the students who attend universities like Jindal, they were burdened about, taking care of the siblings,
right,
adding some cooking work. So I will ask Phalgun because you two with your online teaching mode, I'm sure you all have a vision in place. I mean, when you started, considering that the world is going to move partially online or at least hybrid in some way. But if we can take off from where Rupal was talking about the female workforce, but also about the efficacy of online versus offline. Phalgun.
Yeah, sure. So first, I think, and just given multiple conversations across our own colleagues at upGrad and my conversations with other people, I think the pandemic has definitely been hard for everybody. And from a professional standpoint, I do agree that it's been harder on women in general in terms of the expectations of managing a crowded home, children at home on multiple devices, and then parallelly having to do what you have to do professionally. But my personal view is that while it has been much more harder on women, I think what online education is able to do overall is a net positive. I think there are multiple challenges. There's no doubt about that in terms of digital divide, in terms of efficacy, in terms of multiple things that we have to sort out. But I think overall, you talked about vision, and when we started upGrad, for us, the vision was that any education system is fundamentally based on three pillars. The first is access. The second is once you have that access, you should be able to afford it. And once you have access and you're able to afford it, the third part is whatever you get access to is of high enough quality for you to get the kind of outcomes that you want. And if you're able to do that online, you're just able to do that at a kind of scale which has not been done in the past in education. Because one of the things with education was always that quality and scale are counteracting forces, because most universities traditionally believe that the more students you enroll, the lower the quality. And that is something that we wanted to challenge and say that, look, scale and quality can go hand in hand. And how can we create, let's say, the Nike or Apple of education, right? And I think that is something that overall, let's say, Coursera or upGrad are working towards. And I think there is a very strong net positive effect in terms of the kind of access that people have to pursue something meaningful and help themselves in terms of pursuing much more exciting and accelerated careers. In terms of, and as I said, right, in this process, I think there are a lot of gaps we still have to fill. And there are multiple things in terms of where the efficacy of classroom learning is better. There is no doubt about that. And technology needs to evolve to an extent where we can make sure that we can replicate multiple of those elements. And there are a few elements in which online learning can do a much better job than what can happen on campus, right? While there is a lot of focus on how in-class interaction is better and the experience is better, and there is no doubt about that. But I also think there is a lot of benefit of online learning. Like, for example, we are obsessed about the fact that, look, in an online classroom, every student is sitting in the front bench in that sense, and there's a single student in the classroom. So you can focus on that student in terms of making sure that they are not doodling on the bench, but they're actually paying attention, and you can give them feedback, right? Somebody recently asked me, it's just a funny anecdote, that we do this online proctoring, which is also a major point of discussion, that, okay, how effective is it, etc. And a faculty member recently asked me, not Jindal, but some other faculty member, that, look, I know that this guy is cheating, and this is the problem with online education, because I know you're proctoring, but I can tell this guy is cheating. And I was like, look, I went to IIT Delhi, and I don't know how many guys you think cheat in the regular exam in a university setup, right? It is not like people don't cheat if you have a traditional exam in a classroom. That happens offline as well. But sometimes I think we over romanticize what has been happening for years and forget that, look, there are these systemic problems that happen offline also. And all of these issues will have to be fixed both offline and online. And I think it's a continuous process, but as technology evolves, online will continue to become a very, very strong net positive for a large mass of people in terms of making sure that they have access to upward mobility. The last part on the digital divide, I think, is definitely true. And there is a certain amount of access problem still in terms of having access to internet, having access to hardware. But again, as I said, it is something that we do see is changing rapidly. And I think it has changed rapidly over the last 12, 18 months in India. And we see that it is going to evolve much faster again. And there are 2 or 3 critical elements. The first is obviously infrastructure in terms of bandwidth and hardware for the student. And that is, again, rapidly evolving both in terms of availability and access. The second is the inclusivity in terms of the cost of those hardware and bandwidth. Again, there we see massive progress over the last 12, 18 months, and it's only going in the right direction. And the last part is, once they have the infrastructure, it is affordable and inclusivity happens. The last part is the digital proficiency part, where, as Rupal mentioned, the faculty need to be proficient in terms of how to use this to effectively deliver, and the students need to be proficient to understand how they can effectively absorb it. So I think it's a journey. We're starting off. I believe it's a massive net positive, and I think it's headed in the right direction. And overall, we believe that, as I said, it can make a massive positive impact across a large set of people.
Thanks, Phalgun. I'm going to come back to you, but moving from Coursera and upGrad, who are the millennials in online education, because distance education and online education is not really new. I mean, even when I was in college, IGNOU in India started distance learning. I'm not very sure what I'm quite sure a lot of people got educated, but educated in what sense through those online learning. But if I can come to Eduardo now, to a more traditional university framework, what type of discussions are university leaders like you engaging in regarding the role of technology, given that we are going to be dependent on some form of hybrid learning in the future? Maybe we've fast forwarded ourselves into what would have happened 10 years from now. Eduardo, would you agree with me?
I guess as I listened to the conversation, I had three thoughts. You said that without technology, we'd be in the dark ages during the pandemic. And yet, I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag, right? What we're seeing globally, certainly in the United States, is that technology has in some ways hindered our response to the pandemic, right? The misinformation that's being spread on social media is discouraging people from getting vaccinated, which I think would not be happening if we were confronting the pandemic without some of the technological advances that we've seen in the last 10 or 15 years. So it's a tool, and it's being used by people for good and bad. And I think the same thing is true in the educational context. It's a tool. It's a useful tool. I don't know that the future is entirely hybrid or entirely online. One thing that what we've seen during the pandemic, I would say, are two different things. One is that the flexibility that the technology provides us is very useful, and I think that it will be an important tool in the toolkit for education going forward. Some students prefer the online modality, and there have been some interesting findings, I think, about inclusion and the way in which students who might be discouraged from participating in a class discussion, for example, in person, are more willing to participate online. There was an article recently in the New York Times, I believe, talking about staff and how staff sometimes, that some staff, especially people from underrepresented backgrounds, feel more comfortable working online. They feel like they experience fewer instances of discrimination working online than they would if they were in person in the workplace. So there are some benefits, both in terms of flexibility and in terms of inclusivity. At the same time, and this, I'll just stop with this, that students have spoken to us incredibly clearly that they prefer to be in person. And that's because education is about more than just the transmission of information. It's really about the interactions that happen, the casual interactions that happen before and after class with faculty. They're about the interactions that students have with each other inside and outside of class that are really impossible to replicate with digital modalities. And so I think the future is both in person and online. And some students will not be able to participate in person, and they will choose to use what they can to get in their education. But I think students who can participate in person are going to continue to prefer that, because that educational experience is really enriched by all the interpersonal connections that you can't duplicate through online education.
Thanks, Eduardo. I'm going to come back to you asking about the legal implications of it, given your background. But Ibrahim, if I may come to you, without employment providing a structure in people's lives, and with technology replacing many human activities, which Eduardo just now mentioned, do you think our societies is likely to shift towards more individualistic entities with less human interaction? But also, if you may weigh in how the digital transformation is affecting the university ecosystem and the way research activities are being carried out. I mean, you are a scientist yourself. I'm presuming that laboratory research has been affected, in a devastating way. Has there been a realignment of expectations in terms of output in the digitalized world? And if not, what kind of support and consideration are universities in Malaysia and other places, and you would be in conversation, I'm sure, with other university leaders, doing with research? Because we've got online learning, a form of online learning, for example, in upGrad and Coursera. We've got the traditional universities coping and hoping that we are going to have in-person classes very soon. But I think one of the areas that has been affected adversely has been research, isn't it?
Right. Thank you, Kishalay. On the first question related to how society would be as a result of this application of this online learning massively, the online environment massively. I am not an expert in terms of looking at how, but from the university perspective, what we're trying to do at the moment when we were hit by the pandemic, almost everything shift online. Yeah, almost everything shift online. And what we noticed was that there was a difficulty in terms of not only the lecturer in adapting to it, while you can put a lot of effort and quickly ramp up, as what Rupal and was saying earlier, right? You can put a lot of effort and ramp up the infrastructure, for the university as well as outside. But there's another part of it, which is the ability for the people to actually adapt and adopt to handle those technology. For a start, even our lecturers, when they do the teaching initially, they felt awkward. So we got to support them. We got to put up courses in terms of, we were a bit lucky in the sense that because we see the benefit of doing active learning, collaborative learning, cooperative learning. So we have prepared them to a certain extent before the pandemic came in. So it kind of helped, yeah. But then again, how do you actually conduct that online? That is something that we need to also train and develop them, yeah. And then there's not many experts around because we just hit like that, yeah. And on the student side, they are used to, I think Eduardo put the point that the students would prefer to have that interaction. In fact, I agree very much from the talk that I've listened, even from MIT Business School. And then from the feedback that I've got from the students, from parents, they prefer to have that physical presence. Yeah, because that would, you see, student experience is not just about the teaching and learning and transferring of knowledge, but it's also about the interaction, the social activities that they do, the environment surrounding the university which supports their development. So that is something that if you miss that, I think there would be a significant impact to those people. And if you sort of translate that over the years, let's suppose if the pandemic goes to 3 or 4 years, my worry is to a certain extent, not only that the student may tend to be sort of self-centered, probably, but my biggest worry is they will experience a lot more depression, a lot more, because they are not, now we are having a lot more rise in the mental health cases, yeah, not only among the students, to a certain extent, to our staff, because, we human beings are social creature, right? If we don't do a lot of interactions, social interaction, that to a certain extent can have an impact to ourselves, yeah. And I think that is as much as I could probably actually go on that matter. Now on R&D, our Universiti Teknologi Petronas, we have the project. A lot of the project that we do tend to go onto the application side. Although we do some theories, some fundamental research, but a lot of it are channeled to the application side by virtue of us being tied to a corporate company, Petronas, which is an oil and gas company. So a lot of research to a large extent actually centers around. And it's a lot about physical application. Yeah. So yes, there are technology that allows you to apply AI, to apply IT techniques to actually implement sort of distant monitoring, that kind of things, right? Intelligent predictions of processes, but then again, because the work that we do would require us to do a physical interaction with the equipments, right? So initially, when we have the lockdown, we were dumbfounded, because we have to let our students to come into the university to actually do the experiments, because you cannot do the experiments on virtual. Yeah, we don't have sufficient sort of simulation or technology that can back that up. So what we have to do is we just have to practice the SOP as recommended by the government. We allow students access, students or our research officer, or even to a certain extent or academic, but the SOP has to be followed tightly, just to make sure that they are safe when they do that, and they continue to do the experiments. So in terms of research, we are only affected in terms of the speed of the execution, because because of the access becomes somewhat limited. But we still adapt it. But I believe if you are doing applied research, you have no choice. Kishalay.
Thanks so much, Ibrahim. I'm going to come back to you. Ashwin, we've heard the traditional university, we've heard the hybrid, we've heard the online or the Coursera. Now, since you are going to rank us, and now the ranking is going to depend on a kind of portal or a kind of education that was not something that you had probably taken into account. So how do you think universities should envision the future of using technology to strengthen higher education in a sustainable and scalable manner? I mean, I've heard Phalgun talk about the scalability a lot, and that it is possible without compromising the equity of access. So, I mean, is that something that you all at QS and other ranking are already taking into account?
Thank you so much, Professor Kishalay, for that question. I think it's important that we don't just look at from the rankings lens, but I think when we're talking of India, we can see currently how the National Education Policy 2020 is going to impact education and higher education in the next 10 to 20 years. And we've seen that technology is going to be an important part of that transformation plan for India. As a ranking agency and as how we're evaluating, there is definitely a lag period of 2 to 3 years while this is going to start impacting the rankings. But what technology has done to higher education has been tremendous. It has provided, of course, access at perhaps low cost to a larger population. There has been international exposure for faculty members in India, much more than what it would be in the past. Students have been able to experience guest speakers from around the world. So there are definitely advantages for this. One of the areas which rankings looks at is internationalization. And I think with technology, getting international students and getting international faculty is going to be a boon, because it will support more international students to come in. Research in 2020 actually has done much better than the previous years, because it has allowed faculty members to collaborate at the desk. Of course, there is definitely the applied area there, which has been a challenge. Collaboration, meeting new people, taking the research to a next level besides just your the research which you do at your desk has been a challenge. I don't think we will see a particular impact, a negative impact on this on the rankings. But of course, while the rankings are there, we are also talking to universities, we're talking to students, and we're talking to faculty members. And one of there are a couple of things I would like to mention here, what we've heard. One of them is that definitely most of the students who we're talking to are looking at a hybrid model for the future. And I think because what has happened in the pandemic, it has been a knee-jerk reaction. So even the faculty and the students are looking at a model which is sustainable for the future. And I think the previous speaker as well, Eduardo, mentioned, it's about coming into the classroom and meeting people and the interaction, which makes higher education and makes a person what they are. So we should be looking at that. And I think what we haven't spoken today, while the benefits of technology, I think we have pushed 5-10 years in the future by COVID. So people have implemented a lot of things which probably would take the next 10 years to implement. But with that, I think the impact on well-being has been the most underspoken element generally. And when we did a survey last year, we've seen amongst the faculty, I mean, we talked so much about students, and we talked about, how do we provide them holistic education. Everybody is a front bencher, but what we don't talk about is the impact on faculty. Now, definitely the rankings looks at research output. We look at the faculty-student ratio. We're looking at the research output. But what about the faculty? And I think an alarming figure which came out of the research we did last year was almost 10% has seen a sharp increase in their stress and anxiety levels, because it was not easy for the faculty who's been always teaching in a traditional classroom without any kind of plan or any kind of, within almost a week, they had to get into the virtual mode. So that has been a challenge, and almost 50% reported a moderate increase in their anxiety or stress levels. So that's been, I think, the takeaway for us is how the institutions and perhaps also ranking agencies in the future start looking at faculty as well, because we always have been focusing on the student part of it. So that's the most important part. There are also challenges, I think, with micro-credential courses. We have, we have Coursera here today, which I think has supported a lot of micro-credential, and I think they do a full set as well. That will help also in the future with the NEP with coming in, and I hope these credentials would start to impact the students, and also with the academic bank of credits as proposed by National Education Policy, that will provide a holistic experience for the students, and hopefully will also support the university in the rankings in the future, because I think having students who have international exposure at a very early stage will be good. So on our side, we are optimistic, but I would like to say that one is that the institutions should be looking at faculty well-being. Second is that providing better access to the students. And I think now would be the time to start planning for the next 5 years, because what institutions should be doing with, along with the government, because this is not an institutional, an institution cannot themselves do this especially in a country like India, where you have to involve the government, and providing better access to the second and third tier cities and villages, where it's not just having your I mean, almost 80% of those surveyed last year were using Wi-Fi, were using the internet on the dongle, which is alarming, because if you want to really take us to the next level, we should be having stable broadband internet available to at least majority of the population. And I think with the Digital India mandate and taking the fiber to the last mile, institutions should be championing this with the governments right from the early on. And I think that will really bring not just, rankings will be the last part of it, but at least having more qualified, happy faculty and students. And I think that will eventually have a better impact on the rankings. And that will also impact, I think, having better connectivity will also impact better research, because of course, some of the international best practices require you to use those virtual labs, which definitely require, a stable a connection. And besides stable connection, I think it's also availability of electricity and other things. So there are challenges. We have moved fast, but there is still a lot of more work to be done. And I think institutions should play a role in that.
Okay, thanks so much. There's a huge audience engagement, lots of audience questions. But before we come to the audience questions, I'll do a quick round of, questions to you guys. If you can keep your responses brief, I'll start with Eduardo. What do you tell your faculty and students, Eduardo, about what Ashwin just now raised? I mean, there is the stress level is high, there is digital fatigue, and of course, there is a digital divide even in developed countries. It's not just underdeveloped countries. So what is the approach that university leaders have towards your own faculty and students?
Well, I think the key thing is we have to support all of them. So that, for our students, that means making sure that they have the technology they need. We'll provide them with laptops.
I think Eduardo's audio is
lesson plans in understanding the technology that we're asking them to use. And so, at Seattle U, one thing that we did early on was really bolster our an office that focused on teaching technology and getting faculty up to speed on technologies that, frankly, before COVID, most of us we were aware of, but had not actually used. I think my first Zoom meeting was probably about a week into the pandemic. I just not something that I had to use before. And I, trying to figure out how to get the chat to work and the yes and no buttons and all that. I mean, it's just a new experience. And so providing that kind of support for faculty, I think, is very helpful. It doesn't eliminate the anxiety or the stress associated with that sudden shift, but it's a responsibility of the institution to make sure that we can ameliorate that as much as possible. And so those are really the key things that we can do. And then going forward, I think it's to assure both faculty and students that we're going to take a hard look at this experience of the past 18 months and take the best of it, right? Take the lessons that we've learned and apply them going forward, so that we don't just go back to the way that we've done things in the past, but that we, to the extent that we think we can do things better now than we could then, that we make that possible. And so I think, it won't look the same once we're back after this pandemic as it did before. I think we've taken a big step forward, but I think that like I said before, it's going to be some kind of mixture that draws the best from both the prior model and the COVID model.
Thanks so much, Phalgun. Not just over the last 1.5 years, but it's kind of accelerated over the last 1.5 years that, robotics, advanced materials, 3D printing, quantum computing, blockchain, 5G, words which were not familiar to me, and now I seem to be, pretty much familiar. But Phalgun suddenly disappeared from the screen. So if he doesn't come on, I'm going to throw this question to Rupal. Do you think, Rupal, because Phalgun is still not there, that it would be safe to say that we are in a fourth industrial revolution, as a lot of people are talking about now? Rupal, if you can take that.
Right, and I see Phalgun's back, but I actually want to start with reflecting on something that Ashwin said. Ashwin, I think you talked a little bit about mental health and well-being. I think that is so true, not just for faculty and students, but just for professionals all around. A couple of things we've seen at Coursera is that, as you said, at Coursera, we offer an entire range of programs, whether it's degrees and certificates or MOOCs. And so we've seen that some of the courses, the online MOOCs that have really taken off, are the ones on well-being in mind and health. So for example, University of Michigan has a course on finding the purpose and meaning of life by a professor called Vic Stretcher. That course started in the pandemic and has about 100,000 plus courses. And Yale has a professor, Laurie Santos. Her course on science of well-being has about 3.38 million people, most of whom joined in the last year. And we just see that this is so critical to just people all around. And we work with a lot of campuses. So during this time, Coursera and Kishalay, this is probably pivoting to your question now. One of the things that we started to see during the pandemic and kind of encouraged us to introduce something new was that campuses around the world who don't necessarily have access to expert faculty in certain domains. So the fourth revolution, talk about data analytics, robotics, etc. And you could think of these as community colleges in the US or other kind of institutions or arts institutions that want to think about how to apply data science to arts. We're coming to Coursera and saying, hey, Coursera, during this time when we can't even go acquire faculty, can you help us with content from your catalog? And we began to work with a lot of campuses during the pandemic, giving this content to them for free, such that they could apply cross-domain information. If they were a tech school, they could leverage all of the psychology-based content that we had to kind of leverage that reflection in their learners. And if they were, let's say, an art school, they could use data sciences to see kind of really the application. So I think that Kishalay, we're really going towards what you said, though how I would really summarize it is technology can really be the promise of equity, but only as we begin to see online learning and enabling access to all learners everywhere and remote learning. I think one thing we haven't talked about is remote work, how a lot of companies are opening up to remote work. So in a world where you can learn remote, or actually building on Ibrahim and Eduardo's perspectives, if you are the kind of learner who would like to make that choice of learning remotely and perhaps working remotely, then all of a sudden you have a lot more opportunity to tap into.
Thanks. Ibrahim, if I may ask you, I mean, I'm not very familiar with the terrain in digital terrain in Malaysia, but given the digital divide, because the digital divide is a reality. I mean, that's not something that we are going to run away from, or that's not something that we're going to be able to bridge overnight, particularly in countries like yours and mine. And it can be, of course, attributed, as Phalgun and Rupal and others mentioned, to the lack of infrastructure at a country level. But how do you think universities can collaborate with government authorities and with online portals like Coursera, upGrad, etc., to promote policy implementation that enables the students with easy access of infrastructure for seamless online learning? Now, seamless online learning sounds almost pretentious to me, because I mean, it is not going to be. It's not seamless online learning. It's difficult. It's difficult because I mean, I'll give you a small little example, and Phalgun is back with us now. It's like an Indian upper middle class Indian household, affluent, let's say, with 3 kids. Now the parents, Indian parents, don't believe that the 3 kids deserve 3 different rooms. So they're all put into one room, and all the 3 kids from one room are attending classes. And so they are not going to switch on their video. There is enough disruption and interruption out there. And the faculty is expecting them to behave. The kids out here are having a circus out there. Now, that's not seamless learning. So how do you think, Ibrahim, that this collaboration can happen? Because we have to collaborate at some level. And I really will have to, I want your responses to be brief so that I can take the audience question. We have plenty of audience questions.
Okay, Kishalay, if I can just give a brief. For a start, we do experience that for our students, Kishalay, where there are students who are staying in cities. But what we did was, by understanding their problem, we sort of, a lot of the universities also work with the government to enable the students, those students who are sort of underprivileged, to come back to the university, and we sort of manage and take care of them so that they have a lot more access and also privacy for them to conduct their learning. Okay, now in terms of developing policy with the government, I think we have to sort of establish the understanding and exchange each other perspective. While the government will have the challenges of getting the fund in order to develop the infrastructure, well, either they do it through all these private companies, yeah, that are offering services, yeah. But as a university, we have to share what are the challenges, the perspective, as well as the solutions that we can propose to the government to take on board and work with whatever parties out there that will be able to help. Now, on the other hand, we as a university, we have to also look at what are their challenges and perhaps conduct research, do discussions, intellectual discussion, work with them and see what could be the best way out. Yeah. So understanding and support from each other are very important. And I think these are happening stronger and stronger. And coming quickly to the digital divide, Kishalay, especially the East Malaysia, right? We have the Peninsular Malaysia and the Borneo side, right? On the Borneo side, I have to admit the digital divide is even worse. In our case, we do have students coming from the underprivileged family. Yeah, what we did was we have some funds that we work on, right, through our effort. We provide them with the hardware, and also support on the software. What hardware means is on the laptop, right? We sort of purchase a laptop and support our students who do not have or cannot afford to have them. Yeah, and then we make a deal with the bandwidth provider to actually allow our students to afford, yeah, for that when they are at home. Otherwise, if they are back in the university, it's no issue. But when they are out there, that is a problem.
Thanks so much. I will start with the audience questions, and leave my questions aside if I can ask one last question to you guys later. But Phalgun, since you're back, was it a digital disruption that you went out? I mean, imagine in New York, you're having digital disruption, and now we are talking of a seamless teaching in rural India. But one of the questions which you would like to, and you mentioned about it, you mentioned about scale and quality, and you said scale and quality is possible to achieve. And one of the questions from the audience is that how do you ensure quality of online courses? How can engagement of students be increased in virtual mode? And Phalgun asked me, I've gone through 3 semesters teaching students, and I am not very sure of how long we can sustain it. But if we have to, we will have to sustain it. I mean, there is not, the last August, we thought this August we are going to be in class. We are not in class in August, and we are managing. But is that going to be how it is going to be? So
yeah, sorry, first of all, I apologize for the digital disruption. My Wi-Fi is extremely patchy today. But to answer your question, I think one of the things that I believe is that while there will be a lot of on-campus students and existing faculty who will feel like there is disruption and they're not getting the same kind of experience, I think I come from the other side of the world where people who do not have any kind of access are doing these programs and are saying that, look, I never thought I would have this opportunity, and now I have access to do something really meaningful and change my life, right? So I think these are, for me, it is almost like, let's say you're doing high-end luxury shopping. You would obviously want to go to the store and you want to have the experience, but that's one part of the shopping experience, right? But there is a lot of other stuff that happens where people would rather sit at home and order in because it's a much more comfortable experience with the same kind of outcomes. So I think that is something that, while education is very different, it's a much more complicated product in terms of the outcomes that are expected. I do believe that there is a large category of people who we can serve by effectively leveraging technology and making sure that they have access to high quality education. So the faculty will need to get used to it. The consumers and learners will need to get used to it. And there is a large set of people out there. Just in India, right? I mean, 38 million people are in college when 140 people are supposed to be in colleges. Right? There are 82 million people who don't even have access or who don't think there is a value proposition that is relevant for them. Even the 38 million people who are in colleges have very, very poor outcomes for most cases. Very few people are privileged to go to great institutions like Jindal. So I think we need to appreciate the fact that there are a lot of people out there who are struggling to get the right kind of outcomes and the right kind of return on investment. And for them, this could be a very real, valuable proposition.
Ashwin, you talked about mental health, you talked about faculty stress. I remember last year, I think Berkeley did a survey on faculty morale. I think that's a very pertinent point that you make. I'm sure members of the audience, if they are faculty out there, will really appreciate. There's also, a more fundamental thing about not just the mental fatigue. Physically, we are not built in a way. We are not designed in a way to sit and look into computer screens for 12 hours and 18 hours. So, how do you? I mean, have you taken this into account? And I'm not asking this from a point of what you do at QS. I'm sure QS is not going to take into account of body stress. But there's a lot of, and one of the audience questions, that body posture and physical weakness arising out of long, arduous hours of online sessions is slowly but steadily growing to become an issue. Along with this, mental health is already recognized as one of the greatest issues of online learning. And we encounter that almost every day. This time, I personally called up students at the journalism school. It was easier because journalism school is smaller. We had about 175 students. I personally called each and every student, and I can safely say about 50 to 60% of the students have either suffered or were infected by the virus or have suffered at home in some way or the other, and they were still coping. Ashwin, have you taken that into account? I'm sure you did while you were sitting out there.
Yeah. So thanks for the question, Kishalay. I think it's such an important question because India or most of the institutions or even companies were not prepared for this extended work from home. So while there is stress on the mental level, there's also the physical stress, as you mentioned, the body posture and the long-term impact. And I think this is where a top-down approach from the leaders at the institution is important. And if you talk of academic institutions right now, most of the institutions, when we pushed into this work from home or study from home, never even had a policy on well-being, or at least reaching out or trying to reach out to at least your immediate colleagues or your immediate students and finding out how they're doing. Are they keeping well? Do they need anything at that time? So I think that policy in any institution is really important because you have to reach out to people, and it should start from the top and should trickle down all the way till the last level, because you have to, one is first reach out to people, engage with them. So those wellness sessions, I mean, we at QS have literally every week, and I think all of you whoever in the corporate world perhaps might be seeing virtual yoga sessions and meditations and information on how do you work for long hours, or disconnecting, having that really hard stop at 5:30 or 6. So because one of the things people don't realize is work from home can people can work for longer hours. So that engagement from the leader on the top-down approach is important, to have that policy in place, to implement it and connect with the faculty and students and with your employees to be able to share on those best practices. On the other side, I think there isn't any public or any private mandate which says this is what you should do. So at QS, and this is from our evaluation side, we created the e-lead mechanism, which when people were thrown into the online mode, didn't know what do you have to do. The basic steps of, for example, data privacy. I mean, this is something which people even never thought of. How do we manage data? How do we look at perhaps keeping data secure? What's the backups required? So, and besides mental health and so on. So we created a methodology which I think Jindal Global University also was e-lead certified, is looking at a 20-point agenda on what should institutions do to go online. So that is important. I think that can probably translate. We only did it in India, but I think that could translate to literally any part of the world, because that looks at some minimum standards you need to have, or some minimum thought you need to put into an online mode. So that is available on the web. Anybody would like to look at it and implement it at their institution is free to do so.
What are the key takeaways of those 20 points? I mean, without going to all the 20 points, I mean, what would be the top 2 points?
The top was availability of, besides you having your, most institutions never had an LMS. Before this, it was perhaps even WhatsApp was one of the LMS systems, because people were just sending those links to join the meetings on WhatsApp and Zoom and so on. So availability of an LMS came out really on top, because I think most of the institutions then implemented a LMS system. The second is availability of an on-call technical or help desk, where people could just call in and say, well, I have this problem. My mouse is not working, or can you arrange for me something or my keyboard is something is wrong, or my connectivity is a problem. So availability of almost 9 to 6 kind of help desk was something which institutions implemented. And the third most, which we never thought about in Indian academia generally for remote learning, was the disaster recovery mechanism, where we are doing all these teaching and learning and assessments, and do we really have this do we have a disaster recovery policy which makes sure we can recover this at a later point in time? So 3 major areas came out of this exercise. And one last part which I'd like to mention, perhaps I should not on a public forum, and I think we haven't disclosed this out, is the use of pirated software. While we all can think about, we're talking about connections and so on, but this is a major problem. And we have given several recommendations across to Indian institutions on how do they get the best practices in recommending, in using licensed software, because some of them are not even aware of what kind of use of pirated software your students are using on your network. So it's beyond just your own network, but beyond outsiders. So I think there are so many issues which we need to resolve. We have kind of went 5-10 years ahead, but there's a need to start looking at these and using some global benchmarks, while there are benefits of online teaching and learning.
All right, thanks. Eduardo, if I can come to you now for the question that I wanted to ask you about the legal aspect. I mean, disinformation and misinformation isn't new. It's just more accelerated now. It's just more aggressive now. And with technology, with speed, with the digital transformation within quotes, I think the danger of disinformation has just increased manyfold. Is there a way that we can contain it from academic institutions? What can we do to contain this?
I really don't think academic institutions are in a position to respond to this. The scale is well beyond where any of us operate. I think this is a question for states, for governments to engage with. I can't pretend to have the answer. The conversations that are happening in the United States now are around antitrust law and whether there's something that can be done to go after the scale of these social networks, but also their accountability for a business model that really rewards extremism and rewards very emotionally charged content, whether or not it's accurate. And as the purveyors of that information, I think they do need to be held somewhat accountable for the consequences of facilitating that. So I think there are a number of legal avenues for that. But I think the solutions are going to run at the level of nation states and not institutions of higher learning.
Thanks. I mean, I will have to wrap up like in 2 minutes. If I can throw the last question to you, Rupal, is from the audience. What can be done to somewhat simulate online the growth of human interaction experienced in campus life, considering students are missing out on it in the primary years of growth? Now, you will continue to with Coursera, in the sense that Coursera will continue to be doing online courses, and a lot of other traditional universities probably will go back, hopefully, in-person classes. But even within Coursera, or how do you simulate that? Because that's possible to simulate, I guess, given the technological advancement that we have today.
Right, and I will be humble and say that I don't think we can replicate in person, and so I don't think it's possible to try for that. But in the degrees and in kind of the university certificates world that we do, I will offer a couple of examples. One is Coursera has something called Labs. It's a product where faculty and learners can leverage a virtual desktop, and they don't need to download any kind of software. So whether it's data science or it's NB Grader, etc. So there's a lot of tools that they can easily, without having to download, really kind of learn programming, learn coding, work on projects, and then showcase it on their LinkedIn. So I think there's one part of engagement, which is with people. The other is engaging beyond lecture in the technical world, which I think is really possible with technology. The other, really quickly, I will say, is at Coursera, what we're seeing is faculty are really engaging with active learning in degrees. So just like in your classroom, and Eduardo, I imagine you will know this better than me, and so will Ibrahim, in a classroom, you have these 2 kids or 4 kids who are constantly kind of talking to each other and disrupting kind of the conversation in the broader classroom. What we're seeing faculty do is they're encouraging students to really comment on Zoom chat and have a lot of conversation on Zoom chat. And they have their TAs privately message them and tell them, hey, something interesting is going on. Why don't you highlight X person's Y comment? And the faculty is then able to get into those private conversations that otherwise used to happen on the side, on the desks, which were often disruptive, now via Zoom chat. And I think those are the kinds of small experiments that we're seeing faculty run via active learning. That might be kind of, again, a glimmer of hope into not necessarily replicating the real world engagement, but helping online find its own way of engagement.
Thank you so much. To quote Arundhati Roy, the Indian writer, who had this wonderful piece last year, that the pandemic as a portal, and she ends the article by saying, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us, or we can walk through lightly with a little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. I think the transformation is upon us. How we bring in ethics, how we do it responsibly is another thing. There has to be much more collaboration, much more participation in trying to achieve it. But I don't think so we can run away from the fact that that we are going to be stakeholders in this transformation. Thank you, each and every one of you, members of the audience, my panelists, for this very engaging but continuing conversation. I hope to be in touch with you, and members of the audience, please send us feedback and engage with us and tell us what you think and how you can be part of this transformation. And I see my Vice Chancellor, Professor Raj Kumar, here as well, back again.
Thank you, Kishalay. What a fascinating panel. Thank you, Ms. Rupal Nayar, Professor Ibrahim, President Peñalver, Dr. Ashwin Fernandes, and of course, Phalgun. It was a fascinating panel because it was one of those panels where we discussed what we are all doing as we speak and what the future is going to be like. So I'm grateful to you for your time and indeed your participation. We will have a short break and we'll have the next panel beginning in 15 minutes. Thank you.